What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassity. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Don't forget to follow, subscribe, share, like, comment. All those things help the show. Folks, I am really excited about my guest because he's a guy that I've been following, and I see all the good works he does. I'm honored to have him on the show. It's Dr. William Sansing, and he's a man of all seasons, but it's amazing what kind of things that he's been able to do post-prison. He has over more than 2 decades post-justice involvement as an advocate for people with disabilities, people directly impacted by the legal system, and people with substance use disorders. He received a doctor of philosophy and counselor education, school counseling and guidance services, and sociology from Mississippi State University. He has a book. He's an author also. He has a book called Beyond Prison, Finding Second Chances Through Grace, Resilience, and Community. Recounts an upstanding church-going citizen with a 3-year stint for wire fraud who became a licensed counselor, educator, and prison reform advocate. I can't wait to jump into all this with William. I first want to welcome and recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots looking for a car? Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They are your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you, negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. William Sansing, welcome in. Thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for the honor of just having the opportunity to talk and share. And, you know, I have to admit, as you were reading some of that, I'm like, who is this guy he's talking about?
Well, I got to tell you, you know, I'm such a big, you know, part of this show is breaking the narrative of, you know, the nightmare success story of, you know, dealing with your worst nightmare. And then I think one of the hardest things that people don't realize when they go through having to go to prison, you know, they go through the embarrassment, shame, and everything that happens, and you go to prison, but nobody really knows how difficult it is to get back into society. And one of the things I really like about this show, and this goes into 435 prisons across the United States, is that there is hope out there, and people do break narratives. It's hard. It's real hard because you're tattooed from this point forward the rest of your life, but you got to figure out how to do it. And I think that's what's so inspiring about your story is you went through all that and you got out and you found a passion to really help people. But I'm curious, William, where all that came from. What was life like for you growing up as a kid?
Oh, gosh, if we step back into that space, I had about as idealistic, stereotypical, laid really good foundations in childhood as you'll find for a guy growing up in the South. I grew up on a pretty large family farm and agricultural business, and and refer to this some in the book. You mentioned that I grew up. I was exposed to a lot of opportunities at a very early age. Um, all my friends worked for our family. We had a lot of activities. We had a livestock farm, and we raised we raised products for feed, and then our family had a small meat processing plant that had a retail outlet, and it wasn't a huge thing, but it was sizable in our community. So, I was connected. I had a lot of good foundational things that, laid a foundation for some outwardly looking in success, even as a young person.
So that's interesting because you said did you, when you were growing up, William, were you thinking that's something I'm going to do? I'm going to follow into the family business?
Yeah, really. That's all I knew that life had to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Now I did have, what I considered a very traumatic thing that happened as a preteen. My mother was killed in a car accident.
That is
And
dramatic.
that kind of changed a lot of things inwardly for me. And I did, even though I am a textbook extrovert, I love people. I draw my energy from people, being around people, and really enjoyed being in the family business. I never really considered doing anything outside of that.
So when you,
Graduated high school, went to college at Mississippi State University as an undergraduate, majored in something related to agriculture, went back home, and that was a weird time in history. I know this isn't really the focus of your, your show, but it was a weird time in history where young people that wanted to remain in agriculture, there was a lot of programs to help us do that.
mm-hmm.
And at
What time
21,
period would that have been, William?
that would have been in the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
So when I turned almost to the day when I turned 21 years old, the Farmers Home Administration loaned me $450,000 to expand our family farm, and with almost no equity.
Wow.
What you take all those good foundational things, and then you expose a 21-year-old to that.
That's a lot.
And
That's
you put him in a family business that doesn't have a lot of stuff written down on a piece of paper about how it's going to function.
Sure.
And
Right.
then
There's not a lot of written business plans on a farm. My grandpa had a milk farm, and all I knew was it was really cold in the morning. Go out and milk cows. That's about all I knew. But did you have siblings in this whole world you were in?
I did. My dad remarried a couple of years later. One of my memorable moments in childhood is at the age of 14, I was my dad's best man at his wedding to marry my, for all practical purposes, my mother,
yeah,
my, stepmother. And she had a son and a daughter, and I had a brother and a sister, and we became a blended family.
Blended family.
Very much under the microscope of the community. That kind of added to some of the inward pressure to make everything work on the farm. But
how big was the place where you grew up? What size was the town?
Oh, the town?
Yeah.
Population 800.
Yeah. Little town. That's what I thought. Yeah.
20 miles away from a small southern college town that swells to, at that time would swell to 30,000 when the students were here and 15,000 when they weren't. But
what was it like for you, William, being from a small town like that, being on the farm, doing all that you knew was farm, and going to Mississippi State?
Well, my biological mother taught at Mississippi State, so I was exposed to Mississippi State early in life. I didn't think much about it. That's just kind of what was expected at that time, So went there, did that. Somehow we grew to a level where all my siblings and some of my other relatives that wanted to come back to the farm could come back to the farm. And, even at this stage of life and with all the things you mentioned, I'm still not sure what I'm good at sometimes, but I am good at pulling resources together and kind of figuring things out sometimes. And I was able to pull together the resources where we grew, and we had a lot of apparent success, but behind the scenes, we were still operating on credit and borrowing here and robbing Peter to pay Paul. And it grew to where in my mid 30s, I had access to as much as I wanted of a $25 million line of credit in the cattle industry. And then I had local lines of credit that ranged from $500,000 to $2 million. And it just spun out of control.
So is that really, I mean, I know, we had a family business and it got to be a national company. And I also think there's things that happen, William, where I know in my case, where blind spots happen, with risk and success, you can create blind spots for yourself, intentionally or unintentionally, because things get there's so many different lanes of it as it grows. But for you, did you realize that your world was getting in a gray area?
There were parts of me that did, but as we grew, strangely enough, and I like to say, at this stage of life, I identify with a couple of recovery communities.
Mm-hmm.
Substances weren't really my thing, but behaviors that fit all the criteria for gambling-like behaviors
Yeah.
fit me to a T. And looking back, I began to isolate more and more and think I can find a solution to this. I can do this. I can leverage this. I can make this work. And the more we grew, the less I communicated with,
Mm-hmm.
my siblings, my family, even my wife. I just, a little over 30 years ago, when I began to get access to what I consider pretty big time money,
Mm-hmm.
this is, I guess, the biggest blind spot. I had unlimited money to buy cattle, but I didn't have enough resources to take care of them. So that's where the willingness to say, hey, I can dip over here and take some money that's really supposed to go to buy cattle and I can buy other things with it.
Yeah.
And then you spill over into, hey, I'm doing all this. Maybe I deserve a better standard of living than I'm really earning.
Yeah.
And it just really spun out of control. And somewhere deep inside I kind of got to the place where I kind of hope this thing does blow up. That'll be an easier exit than if I have to say, I can't do this anymore. Y'all going to have to figure it out.
Well, that is interesting. So your thought is this is getting to be I'm so isolated, so stressed. I know what's going on. I don't know how long I can keep this juggling act going. It'd be just better if it just explodes.
Yeah. I mean,
is that what happened?
Pardon?
Is that what happened?
Yeah. Yeah. In December of 1995, I came to a place where I knew this was not sustainable. And I did at that point say, and strangely enough, and maybe this is part of denial, maybe this is part of addiction.
Yeah.
I still thought everything would be okay.
Yeah.
We were extremely diversified, extremely for a family farm business. We were very vertically integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of pieces that were sustainable for generations, and I thought this will be okay, and the family farm did survive. I mean,
Yeah.
my brothers came up with some ideas to keep things going. And now arguably they have one of the best, most ideal farming enterprises in North Mississippi.
That's great. Well, I'm curious, when your nightmare happened that you knew that it was all coming down, was it a knock on the door? How did it happen because everybody's got a different story.
Well, I mean, the truth is, and to be honest, I haven't stepped back into those details in a long time, but the company I was doing business with was headquartered in northeastern Colorado, and they merged with another company, and they did a head by head count of all the livestock inventory. And they showed up one day and said, we're going to start riding around and we're going to count cattle. And, over a couple of days, it was like, wait a minute, things are out of control here.
What's going on?
And, then I was, and then I, and I had been dealing with some depression and things like that, with just isolating and denial, all those behaviors that go with any type of addiction. And, I was kind of given the option. I think you need to go to some type of treatment program for a period of time, or the sheriff can come get you and take you somewhere to reflect on this. And so that's a pretty easy choice to say, I think I'll go to a 28-day type program. And, and part of your show, as I'm understanding it, is to talk about the nightmare of these experiences. And then how do we find hope after?
Sure.
And the day it became known, and this, I think I described this pretty well in the book. The day it became known, I didn't think there was anything after that.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, I had lost all hope.
Yep.
And
which is dangerous when you lose hope.
Oh yes. And interestingly enough, my wife, she had a 35-year career at Mississippi State, and she was at work, and I called her and I said, look, some things have happened. I'm not going to be here when you get home this afternoon. You know where all the important papers are. I love you. You'll be okay. But I don't have anything to offer any longer. And I went out in the woods with a gun and had a gun to my head and was ready to pull the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard a voice as plain as day. I saw an image that kind of was like my mother. And I'm not saying that's what I saw. I'm just saying that's what I heard. Maybe it was my brain, playing tricks. I got no real explanation for that. But I heard a voice as plain as day say, you can't do this. I've got too much work for you to do. You need to get your butt up, dust your britches off, go in the house, and there's going to be a better way. Mm-hmm. And I remember in that moment, kind of resolving myself to, I don't know what the future holds, but I'm going to go in a different direction. And whatever it takes to stay in that direction, I'm willing to take those steps. And, you mentioned, some of the things that I've seemingly accomplished over the last 28, 30 years, depending on when you start the clock. Mm-hmm. I got no explanation for a single one of those things.
Well, I think I understand though, William, because I was in the exact same position and took the exact same steps. I didn't have a gun. I went to the car and either go run into a tree or let the car run. I think something happens when somebody hits that moment in their life, and a lot of people don't, thank God. But there's only two ways to go. You roll up in a fetal position, or you just start stepping out. But I think the difference is with the step out is that you've decided you're stepping away from that victim idea to a survivor idea. And that makes you even feel different. I think I know by the time I got to my place at Leavenworth, I had already experienced that no matter what happened, I was going to survive it. And I think that's what you're talking about is whatever you decided that day, as you got back to the house, it was just going to be different. Whatever happened going forward, you were going to step through it. And I think that's something, I don't know what that is, that intangible thing is to grab on. There's the book of or the movie Ordinary People, where the one son holds on to the boat and the other son lets go. I don't know what makes that happen, but you held on. And thank God you held on, because you've helped so many people with your story and your experience and your understanding. And what would have happened if that, that day, ended that day? It's such a crazy thought. But when you step back into that world saying this is going to be it, how long did it take for you to go through that to where you were actually standing at the gate and going in?
Going into prison?
Yeah.
Did
it take a while?
15 months.
15 months? That's a good while.
Mm-hmm.
And you got you did a 3-year sentence, is that correct?
I had a 36-month sentence, yes.
How was it for you?
Talking about the prison time?
Yeah.
For me, and the idea of what it was like for me has shaped a lot of the things I've tried to do. Given where I was largely mentally, I needed that time to reset. And even my wife, who, you talk about making conscious choices, she made a conscious choice for us to stay together through this.
Which is huge.
Yes. And a lot of people make a different choice.
Right.
And that's okay. One thing I've learned is that, if people make a choice toward recovery, whatever that means, I just believe the forces of the universe will honor that. So even if my wife had made a different choice, I think given the choices we made carried us both in a different direction. So, but you ask, how was it for me?
Yeah.
And even as painful as it is, my wife will say, and we're looking for ways to tell our story together at this stage of life.
Yeah.
Because of her position, she's been less willing to step out there
Mm-hmm.
up until now, but she's retired. So we're looking for that. But she will say, I needed that time to heal. So for me, and this, I guess to try to answer your question completely, they promised me a low-level security institution,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of us white-collar folks get to go to, even
Right.
to start out. But for reasons I still have never gotten an answer to, they sent me to Atlanta Penitentiary Complex to start.
Wow, William. I did not know that about your story.
Yeah.
I didn't
So
read that.
yes.
Okay.
So,
I learned something new. Wow.
yes, that was like, and if you've watched the movie Shawshank Redemption, I
Yeah.
felt like my first night there was very much like Andy's first night in Shawshank.
Yeah.
And really, I didn't get my designation until a few days before I was supposed to self-surrender, which the idea of self-surrender to me is like it's like so many of the things that seem like disconnects and like, okay, you've told me I've got to be removed from society,
Right.
but you're going to trust me to go home and 30 days later show up where you
Right,
tell
here
me
I
to
am.
show up. That makes perfect sense. But anyway, so as it worked out, our accountant's son was a probation officer. So I called him, I think the Wednesday or Thursday before I was supposed to self-surrender, and said, Stephen, they hadn't told me where to go. I said, where do I go? And he said, well, give me a minute, Mr. William, and let me see what I can find out. And he looks up and he says, well, I don't understand this, but this says for you to self-surrender to the Atlanta Penitentiary.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, wow. And so I show up there that day and at receiving, and I do give a kind of a detailed, recount of this in the book. That the guy says, we ain't got no Sansing on the list for today. And I said, well, I tell you what, I'll go home. When you get it figured out, I'll come back. And he says, people don't show up here looking for the local McDonald's. Come on in. Come on in. We'll figure it out, and we'll get you where you're supposed to be at some point in the future, And so I go in and know very little. And my first night was pretty dramatic. A fight broke out. Somebody was 10 days away from going home, and over a card game, somebody shanks somebody else. They lock us down. I'm scared to death.
Mm-hmm.
And actually a black man larger than me comes by and says, I'm from the Christian community and we're going to take care of you until you learn how to take care of yourself.
Wow.
And I don't know if it's because I was obviously the whitest guy in the pod or in the area or in the dorm, that they knew, hey, this guy
needs some help. He doesn't look like he's been here before.
Yeah. So, and this gets ahead of ourselves, but, I've kind of learned over the years how to, and I wish there was a better word for this, leverage the fact that when I step in a room, I know I'm one of the last people folks think, hey, that guy's been to prison. I wish we didn't have those stereotypes. I wish we didn't have those labels.
Mm-hmm.
My standard answer usually is, yeah, I bet you don't think I have any tattoos either. Yeah. And then they say, yeah, you'd be right. And I say, well, you'd be wrong. Let me tell you my tattoo stories. So, but anyway, back to, so it was, those weeks in Atlanta weren't what I expected, but that community did. I remember thinking when that gentleman said that, and I know people could hear that story and think, golly, that could have gone a lot worse. We see on TV these, and that's true. It could have. But,
yeah.
Man, I was desperate. I was like, pretty much anybody that'll bring me in and teach me how to survive in this, I'm glad to connect,
Yeah.
And I remember thinking in my brain and having a physical feeling that this is what community is supposed to be like.
Right.
You asked about my upbringing. I grew up also in kind of a stereotypical Southern religious environment, and we talked about community and church and all that kind of stuff. And, currently I struggle with organized religion in some ways. And I think a lot of us that have traveled these roads second guess a lot of things. I've just started reading a new book titled Why Can't Church Be More Like an AA Meeting or something like that, But anyway, so I was there for a period of time, and then I did get transferred to Maxwell Air Force Base, which was the low level, camp type thing. And those of us that have done time in those environments, sometimes people talk about how easy it was. But for me, I found some elements being there more difficult than being at the other place because I had no fence, I worked for the Air Force for 20 something months, and, and I don't know, maybe this shouldn't be retold in the public space, but, I drove a truck for the military for part of my time. I left every morning at 6 o'clock, hauled military supplies to another Air Force base. As long as I was back by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, nobody got too bent out of shape.
Right.
And while, your question was, how was it for me? That time gave me the time I needed to reset.
That's really interesting because, and I think it also, while you're resetting, William, being put in an environment like that, Atlanta Penitentiary, you also had to figure out, okay, wow, I'm in the deep end. I'm just going to have to swim. I got to adapt. And I think that's something that, you learn a lot of different things when you go through what we've gone through, but your perspectives change. I'm not the same person I was before I went in. I think for the good, because there's so many things I look at now, and a lot more grateful. I just appreciate moments in time, with family and that, which I did before, but I really, think I'm glad I'm here. But William, when you were getting close to the door of getting out, what were you thinking about? Like, what was your life? What were you thinking in your mind? What's my world going to be like out there? Had you thought or contemplated how you were going to re-enter? Because you accomplished a lot. So I'm interested on how in the world that all happened for you in your brain.
And again, you used the word grateful.
Yeah.
The way I usually introduce myself at a recovery meeting, or, I work at a treatment center some on the weekends, and I try to be consistent in introducing myself and talking about, I got no explanation for the opportunities I've had over the last 28 or 30 years, depending on when you start the clock. And I don't know what gratitude feels like for everybody else. I just know what it feels like for me. And most days it feels like my chest is going to explode. Well, and I know my prison experience it may not be the norm for a lot of folks. And we, in today's world, we talk a lot about reentry and when does reentry begin and things like that. I think reentry begins when you're charged, or, ideally.
I 100% agree.
Ideally, reentry should begin the day you're arraigned, if you are.
Yep.
But very little about my prison journey fits the norm or the narrative and sometimes I think it doesn't fit the narrative that our, advocacy community wants to hear, because it doesn't. My reentry, and to answer your question, my wife and I were working with a therapist to see if we were going to stay together. This therapist happened to work at Mississippi State University, and I would give almost anything if I could find her or her family to thank them again. But she asked me, this may have been a little unethical, but she asked me in the middle of a session one day, what are you going to do when all this mess is over? And I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
I had lost a 6-figure lifestyle.
Yeah.
And was working at the local McDonald's.
That's a difference.
Glad to have that job.
Right.
And I said, I don't know, Dr. Lee. I guess I'm going to work and flip hamburgers. I don't know. And she said, well, I think you'd make a halfway decent therapist.
Wow. So she suggested that.
She suggested it. And I said, well, that's a nice idea. I said, I really think you're crazy. I can't go to school. I got no money. We're broke. Lawsuits everywhere. Everybody's suing everybody. At that point, my denial was still pretty thick. I had no idea I was going to end up going to prison.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't go to grad school. And she said, if I recommend you, they will accept you. And I
Wow.
said, well, okay then. And we got up right in the middle of a therapy session, walked off across campus. We went to the department head of the counseling program, and she said, Dr. Hosey, I'm recommending this guy for grad school. And he said, well, okay, if you recommend him, as long as he meets the requirements, we'll take him. Another man was sitting there, and he said, well, I'm head of the rehabilitation counseling program. I've got a training grant. If you'll choose rehab as your focus, the training grant will pay for your books, pay for your tuition, and pay you $500 a month stipend. And I said, sign
me up.
I didn't have a clue what rehab counseling was, you know. And then that fall, I started classes and was 2/3 of the way through I was very transparent. We told them, hey, got some stuff going on, thinking we'll end up with probate. By then I knew, shortly after that, I knew something was,
Mm-hmm.
So by the time to do classes, I said, okay, got some stuff going on. Don't think it'll be life interrupting, but just want y'all to know. Well, then when I got sentenced, which I actually had an upward departure because the probation office recommended 24 months. The judge went to 30. And then because we objected to that, he gave me an upward departure because I should have taken better care of my family, which is true.
Yeah.
But it was like in the moment, like, what in the hell is going on?
What just happened?
Yeah. But anyway, so I went to the graduate coordinator, her name's Dr. Luby, one of my biggest advocates over these years. Dr. Luby, I said, Dr. Luby, this didn't work out like I thought it would. I'm going to be gone for a while. I guess y'all are going to dismiss me from the program. And she said, nah. She said, we're just going to write it up as on the job training.
I love it. And that is on the job training.
She said, you go do your time.
These are some good people, William.
Oh, I got no explanation.
Oh, man.
I know it doesn't fit the narrative, but so I withdrew from my classes, went home, got my affairs in order, went and did my time, and came back and really picked up right where I was. And when I graduated, they found me a job on campus. I worked at Mississippi State for 12 years. That's the only reason that I was able to do what really was a dual PhD program, which again was not planned. It's just like if you work there, you can take some classes for free. And some friends said, okay. So that's where I worked in disability policy research and program evaluation. And
I think it's fascinating, and I think there's something to you being you can't help, William, but I know when we talked on the phone, you're so open and vulnerable just to just lay it out there. But I think there's something to that when they have that, whatever that is, that thing you have, they want to help. And, it's leading with it instead of hiding it. And you're so, here's who I am. Here's what's happening. And I talk to people a lot because of this show that call me and say, I'm getting ready to go in or this or that, or I got out. And one of the things I say to them is that it's going to be hard no matter what, but get really comfortable with your story, because you need to own your story so that you can tell it, so somebody else doesn't tell it for you. There'll be all kinds of people that can Google or whatever, but when you go to a job or you do whatever, be able to tell your story, because I'm sure you have a story that is you. And I think there's a nugget of wisdom there, William, that you probably aren't even, because you are who you are. But I'm sure when those people were sitting there thinking, this is a guy, I can see him helping people just because I can feel that vibe. And you were so open with what was going on that person just walked you over and there you were. That's crazy. Yeah. I love it. I love that story.
What you're saying is hard for me to step into, but you're not the first person that's told me that. Like I told you, I've worked for the last 6 years at arguably the largest residential drug and alcohol treatment program in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And the nurses have told me before, said, there is a different energy on campus when you work on a Sunday and when you don't.
Mm-hmm.
you can just walk up to a tense situation and it immediately de-escalates. And I don't understand that. I just know as long as I can, I'm going to keep stepping into whatever.
Keep stepping in, and maybe we could clone William, but
I don't know that we need to do that.
So William, all this that was going on, and I know you've been on numerous boards and president of this and that. Where you are now, are and you know, with your wife, and is everything, because I feel like you're following your passion of what you like doing, and would there be anything that you'd change in this weird, strange environment of how this all happened?
I really wouldn't, that, not to step too much in a faith mindset or anything, but, telling stories seemed to work for a guy that lived about 2,000 years ago. So I think we learn best. We connect through stories. So you saying that reminds me of a story. When our daughter got married, and again, you're right. We have been very open, very transparent. This is who we are. We only moved 15 miles from where I grew up. So, we didn't run from our story, didn't know exactly what it was going to be like or what the telling of it would be. But she got married in a church that was very, very helpful to us and provided a faith community that supported us through this whole thing. And one of my best friends, I overheard him saying, he was saying, our daughter's named Jessica. And he said, man, Jessica was such a pretty bride. Said, this is a sweet wedding, and all the emotions that come with it. But he said, don't you wish she hadn't had to go through what she did when her dad went to prison? And, and we're close enough friends, I could say.
How old would she have been when you went to prison?
She was 12.
Okay.
So she turned 13 while I was there, which was a tough time for her. Her dad not there when she becomes a teenager, that was tough. And she's got her own stuff to work through from that.
Sure.
But I told my friend, I said, John, I heard what you said and I really appreciate it. But if I had to risk my daughter not being who she is today, and my son not being who he is today, and me not being who I am today, I would sign up for what we went through.
Wow. That's a deep statement, because you guys went through a lot as a family.
And I tell people in my therapy practice, and a lot of my therapy work is really kind of simple stuff, it just is, but anyway, we play these what if games.
Why do you say it's simple?
Well, because I'm not sure it comes from some deep theory that I learned in grad school, which that's another topic. But I struggled with theories in sociology and counseling because I was a non-traditional student, had a lot of life. And then after you come back from prison, you do see life different,
Sure.
So like, oh, how does this theory fit with just practical stuff? But I tell people we play what if games, what if I'd have made this choice, or what if I'd have made this, or what if I'd have done this? And I tell a story about my wife. I told you my wife has an identical twin sister, and they fit a lot of the stereotypes with twins. And they were kind of a novelty in college, and they both had job offers at the Walmart headquarters in Arkansas right out of college. And sometimes my wife will get overwhelmed, even to this day. When she gets overwhelmed about our journey, she has permission, not that I necessarily have to give it to her, but to say, I'm feeling overwhelmed about our journey, and I just need to talk about it. But she'll say, if I'd have taken that job at Walmart, I'd probably be a millionaire today with stock splits and all that kind of stuff. And I say, maybe you would, honey. We don't know. All we know is life would be different.
Yeah. Life would be different.
What the different is. And that's what I tell people when we, I try to get my clients to practice mindfulness, where we try not to bring too much of the past into the present. We try not to project the present into the future.
Right.
Live and I draw a lot from recovery principles. I think recovery principles make life better for everybody.
I totally agree, William, because all you can deal is with the present. You can't do anything about the past.
Right.
You're not going to. You hope for a good future.
You can't.
I was curious, like with, you said the family went on with their business with the farm, and did all the family kind of stay together and work their way through the whole thing?
Well, they did their version of working through things, and I had to do my version.
Okay.
I
Okay.
mean, just in truth, and maybe this will be a nugget for other people, the system doesn't care if the family gets along or not.
No, they don't. No, they don't.
And I think that's really unfortunate. And
Yes.
again, in my ideal head, the system should be more about reconciliation than punishment and
Oh, absolutely.
retribution.
I mean, if you think about, William, all the limits you have, like when you're in prison, they give you certain minutes that you have to be able to talk to people. You have so many minutes a month. You got these federal, it was 5 cents a minute to type, but all those things, it was really limiting. Then I had, my wife would come every weekend. It was a 4.5 hour drive, but they would limit how much time they could visit. You only had some, and they counted, 1 hour is 2 points. And it was all in on a limiting thing, where I always thought to myself, how crazy is that? If we should be pushing as many family members as we can to stay
Yes.
connected. And it's exactly the opposite. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Well, to answer your question, since it was a family business, and I've heard different tales of this, probably won't ever know the full truth and don't have to know. But I'm told that, the people that really wanted me to experience punishment became afraid that I was getting so much support. We got to let the judge know the full impact of this guy's choices. So my family, my mom and dad, and my grandparents, and my brothers, and my brother-in-laws, were asked to write victim impact statements.
Wow.
And that's where the extra 6 months came from.
Wow.
Now they say they were kind of tricked into doing that, which I don't doubt. And it's not something we've had to go back and rehash.
Yeah.
I don't have to know.
Yeah.
They made the best choices they knew to make to survive.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody went to bed one day thinking everything was fine, woke up the next day
Life
and
changed.
all hell broke loose,
Right.
So to answer your question, yes, they went on, and another part of our community stepped in to help them survive.
That's really interesting.
But
Go ahead, William.
that did create a lot of tension,
Oh, I'm sure.
and then I've
family
learned
business is tough anyway. I grew up in a family business. So
it's tough.
it's always about who's the lead singer. It's like, the Bee Gees or the Fleetwood Mac or the Beatles, like who gets to sing the lead song. It's a funny thing to be in a family business. I want to ask you another a question, but before we do that, I want to recognize the White Collar Support Group. Both William and I are very familiar with the White Collar Support Group. Nightmare Success Podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Mondays, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. For information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So, William, I'm just so I love talking to someone who has been through all the stuff that you've been through. You have your passion. You're doing the things that make you feel like you and feel good because you're using everything that you are, your whole soul, helping other people, because you've walked in so many steps that they can identify with, that you're not reading it out of a book. You're walking with them with this because you've walked these paths. If you think about it, for the listeners out there, what do you think is your greatest takeaway through all this that you've experienced?
That no matter what you are experiencing in life, there is a community somewhere that can help support you through it.
Wow, that's a great takeaway.
The experience in prison where, someone said, I'm from the Christian community, we're going to support you. I got an opportunity to do some work in northern Uganda with females who had been trafficked or kidnapped as children and trained as guerrilla soldiers. And I wondered, how can these women heal from this? And I always struggle telling this story because I'm afraid, especially females will think I'm grading trauma, and I'm not. That's not my intent. Everybody's trauma is their trauma.
Mm-hmm.
How it affected you, how your body holds that trauma is what you've got to work through. At the same time, these young women had experienced traumas that most of us, as hard as our prison experience may have been, it does not equal what these women had been through. And I found some of the happiest, most resilient, most joyful people I've ever been around, because they were part of a judgment and shame-free community where they could talk about whatever they needed to talk about, and nobody was going to throw them under the bus. And to me, that is the key. That was my motivation to write the book. Just begin to get those thoughts out there. Now, you did ask me a question earlier that I want to be sure to look back to about how navigating this, we get comfortable with our stories.
Yes.
And I don't remember in the moment exactly how you ask it, but I just want to be sure that your listeners hear this. Part of me dealing with my story, as comfortable as I say I am, part of that tension never goes away. Last fall, I stumbled into an opportunity. I retired from higher ed in 2020. Last fall, I had an opportunity to step back into higher ed, and I have an online position, and it has been as great of a tension as I've experienced since I left prison. How do I let my new colleagues, which we have a faculty of about 70 or so, how do I let them know who I really am versus what I think their expectations are? Because it's really hard when you are a new faculty, and then the next faculty meeting, people say, okay, who's accomplished something this week? And you just released your book, Beyond Prison, Finding Second Chances.
That's right.
Race community, and you're like, I don't think I'm going to tell everybody that I just released a book, know. But what I have found is I've trusted the forces of the universe to bring those relationships that are necessary. I've probably shared now with probably 20% of my colleagues, and nobody has rejected me.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I get asked about, William, from people who have gotten out. How do I talk about it? Like, if I'm at my kids' soccer game and they don't know so much, I mean, where do I fit that in? All these things. And what you just said there, you kind of let it roll. You find your moments and places and things that you can share, and then it gets there.
And another part of that is I have had a lot of apparent successes, and if you told me 30 years ago my wife would be at a place where we can retire reasonably comfortably financially, I never would have believed it.
Right.
I get to choose how, where, when I tell my story. Some of our friends on this journey, they don't have that freedom.
No, they've got to tell it the next job interview to try to get.
People that don't look like you and I don't have that freedom. And that's another thing, and something else I would suggest people do that are on this journey is, and this is borrowing from Brene Brown's work. If you or any of your listeners are familiar with Brene Brown, I'm a big Brene Brown fan. You don't have to be around me long in my counseling work to know that. She talks about the importance of us finding our core values, not superficially finding the real values. And she says nobody can live more than 2 or 3. We think we can have 5 or 10. We can't. I mean, we can be attuned to those, but we can only live 2 or 3. And it took me a lot of work. But I identified my 2 core values, which are faith and service. And
that's what you do.
Some people in the recovery world question how I talk about values. I believe even in our addiction, even in our poor choices, we are trying to live those core values. We may not have the skills. We may not have the language. We may have trauma that's piled stuff up in our life. I look back in my choices, and I don't mean religious faith. I mean just faith that people are doing the best they can. And if we provide an environment for them to flourish, they will more oftentimes than not flourish. But if we wanted to build a system that perpetuated problems, we would build what we have now.
Exactly.
Why, we talk about in recovery work, that crazy definition of insanity, doing the same thing
over and over, expecting a different result.
What in the world are our public policy makers thinking that?
I don't know.
I mean, it's like, okay. And to me, like, okay, let's just admit it. We want to warehouse folks.
Yes.
We just want to punish folks.
Right.
We don't really care about
rehabilitation.
But if we want to build a system that works, and I think finding our values is an important part. And yes,
Yeah.
faith in humanity and service drive a lot of things I try to do.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you do, William, a lot of that snuffs out hope, the way that you get warehoused and the way that you get thrown back in, the way you can't find a place to live, the way you can't get a job, you snuff out the hope. And I think what you're doing and how you do it is you're building hope back into people to believe that they can take a step, believe that they can get through it, believe that they can survive. And that goes a long ways because, life's tough and hope is a big fuel for your tank. But getting back to you is I think the reason why you're so effective with it is that people believe you because you have the way about you, but you also have the experience. And I think that's a perfect combination to be able to do things. And which leads me to everybody ought to get his book, Beyond Prison, Finding Second Chances Through Grace, Resilience, and Community. And my gosh, isn't he talked about that on this show? I mean, I can't wait to get, I told William before I got on, after I got reading everything, I went and purchased the book. I can't wait to jump into it because I think you're fascinating, William. I think your dedication to service and what you're doing is making such an impactful difference. And you've been doing it for years. So I hope you have the fuel to keep going because it's an important thing. And for me, yeah, go ahead, William.
I had a pretty detailed physical the other day, and one of my doctors said, "Well, I don't see any reason you can't keep doing what you are doing now for another 10 years." He said, "Now, I don't know why you'd want to, but
I love
I
it.
don't
We got
see,
another 10 years booked in with William.
I don't
By the
see,
doctor's note.
I don't see any medical reason you can't keep doing it. Maybe an emotional or mental health reason."
I love it. I want to talk, speaking of grateful, Homestead Financial lets me use this podcast and all the fancy equipment here. I'm so thankful for that. Anybody who's got home mortgage needs, it's Greg Afdiev. He knows all that stuff. He can help you out. My book's out there, Nightmare Success. Go to it, Amazon. Like I said, the likes and the subscriptions and that. If you got any time, I know it's a hassle, but go to Apple, leave a review. It puts the show on Sarah's. Want to know anything about me? It's BrentCassity.com. I spell it wrong. It's with a TY, not a DY. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from prison, stay strong. I'll do the same. Dr. William Sansing, thank you so much for being here today. So much appreciated.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I think many of the things you said toward me, you can say about yourself.
Well, I appreciate that, William. That means a lot coming from you.
No,
Nightmare Success, in and out.